Hello, everyone. This is Richard Kazami from the Old Astoria Neighborhood Association. We are having our monthly meeting, and we appreciate everyone joining us. We have a very interesting program today, featuring number one, Leon Hovsepian, who will be discussing finance in the development world. Often people just view it from the developer side, but they don't know what's behind the scenes, which is money, of course, in finance. So this should be very, very interesting. And he will be followed by Anthoula Katsimatides, a wonderful actress and voiceover artist, amongst many things. We've been friends for many, many years, and she's going to discuss a part of acting and the pandemic and some of her upcoming projects. And last, we have David Burgoa. He's going to be discussing jobs at LaGuardia Airport. When it's finished, or jobs, there'll be coming up quite a few of them, new jobs, and also personal financing in housing, okay? He's with the Neighborhood Housing Alliance. So, okay, I'd like to begin, though, with some other information. All the Astoria Neighborhood Association has been asked to join a community input board, basically CAB, Community Activist Board, okay, referencing the renovations of 21st Street. Those renovations will be basically creating a bus lane down 21st Street. Victor, if you could put up the link, I would appreciate it, for 21st Street. I'd like to go over it very briefly. What we're trying to do now at Old Astoria is get input from people. We put out a post asking for them to email their feelings on what should be done with 21st Street. And that email address is feedback@oana-ny.org. Okay. Victor, are you able to put that up?
Yep, the link is in the comments.
Okay. Okay, are you able to put it up on the screen itself, though?
Sure thing, give me 1 second.
Okay, thanks. Also, we will be joined, we just found out, by our new assembly person, Zoran Mandani. He'll be coming up just in a few minutes to just give an update on what's happening in Albany at this point. Lastly, after this 21st Street renovations, well, here it is. Okay, let's start with it. Okay, basically, what we have here is a plan to create expedited bus service on 21st Street. This is a copy of the link on our website. And if, Victor, if you could click on that link, the first one right there, and this has the presentation from DOT. And briefly, let's go through this very quickly. It's going to be discussing, this is the advisory board meeting, okay? If you give me the next slide, I appreciate it. Okay, they're looking to create a better business program, okay? Then existing conditions, then next steps. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, this is the corridor that's going to be studied. Next slide. And this is some information on previous studies that existed over the last 10 years. Okay, and this is an introduction on the board itself and how it functions and how they try and get input from the community. And next slide. And by the way, I'm going through this very quickly. If you want to actually study this information, go to our website, go to the link that's in chat and under comments, and make your comments to us, please. The next slide is, again, ways that they're trying to get input, more ways for public engagement. Next slide. This is the Better Buses program put together by Mayor de Blasio. And these are some of the options: curb bus lanes, offset bus lanes, bus boarding islands, bus queue jump signals, pedestrian islands, painted curb extensions, Next. And some of the parking options. Existing conditions. This is what's happening right now. Why don't you go right through these? Okay. This gives you the information on what's happening right now. And then this is some of the options for the future. So, again, go to our website. You'll have the link in comments. Check out the study, and then please email us back with comments so that when we have our upcoming meeting, we can express your desires and your needs for 21st Street to DOT. So we thank you for your cooperation in advance and look forward to get a lot of great information. Okay, next, there's a program that we want to start in general. It's called Conversations. This is something that we want to basically try and act a little bit like a think tank in a sense. We try and put out different ideas, no matter how large they are, just to start a conversation with people so that they can eventually come up with solutions for the future. What we've known is whenever we've come up with situations like this over the years, it sometimes takes 4, 5, 6 years, but a lot of these things eventually bear fruition. This is like our drive to create street cleaning in Old Astoria, our drive to extend the ferry system, our ferry from Astoria to the Upper East Side. All these putting in speed bumps took us 5 years. So I want to start getting ideas out there every month or two of interesting concepts, and then get feedback from people. Again, our email is feedback@oana-ny.org or info@oana-ny.org. Victor, if you can put that in the chat, that would be great. If you can put up also that link to the Conversations program, Victor, on chat, and also bring it up on the screen, that would be great. Oh, last thing I want to tell everybody while this is going on, if you have any comments you want to make on the program, please just put them in chat in Facebook or YouTube, and we will see them, and then we will actually ask the presenters those particular questions. If you want to add your email address, and if we don't get to it, we can actually respond via email if you have any questions. And this is an important way for you to communicate with us. So again, you're able to communicate with us through chat on Facebook and YouTube. So please utilize that. Okay, Victor?
Sure. What link do you want to put up?
The one that says uploads 2021/04 Spring in Astoria. It's the one right after the one you just put up on 21st Street on the agenda.
Sure. Give me 1 second.
Briefly, before this goes up, Old Astoria Neighborhood Association and the 30th Avenue Business Association. Frank is their president. He's also on our board, our advisory board. Last year, we were trying to create an open street, open restaurant on 30th Avenue. It did not happen for various reasons, which are explained within this document that we're trying to bring up. We discussed that, and we also want to discuss some of the current issues that are happening in terms of open streets, open restaurants. We tried to sponsor this, like I said, for this year too. We've run into some problems so far, so we're trying to get some community input on this. The major issue seems to be that some very well-respected parties, people that I respect a lot, have a differing opinion with us. They think that if you close the streets, you will increase the chance of chaos and trouble. As you know, we had a lot of such trouble last year, particularly when everybody finally got out of the house after they were being sequestered because of the pandemic. So Our feeling is that if you close the street to vehicles, you will have less trouble, and their feeling was you will have more trouble. We're basing our opinion on the fact that when we've closed other streets, particularly when there's vehicles and problems, the problems have left. When they closed Shore Boulevard, we no longer had the partying and noise that we've had for years down there. When they closed other streets, the same thing. Everything stopped. So what we're trying to find out is if people agree with us that by closing 30th Avenue and possibly Steinway Street during this upcoming season when things get warm, we lessen the chance of problems for both businesses and the communities. We want these places to be able to attract families and people that are positive for the community. Many of the people that were coming down parking were not even purchasing anything for the restaurants. They were bringing their own food and beverages. So all in all, it was not a positive situation. But at this point, of course, because of differing opinions, we have not been able to get something like this approved. There is an approval process ongoing right now. We'd love to get comments from people that we can include in our application. At this point, we are considering doing Sundays, closing it from noon to 11 o'clock, the street, so people can walk down the street during brunch and dinner. We also want to make it an arts walk, so we want to have arts at the same time. So if you can send that information, that would be great. We have a copy of the letter in comments. You have the link to it. It's on our website, and you see a picture of it right here. I won't read it. We've basically gone over it right now, but if you please take the time to check it out and get back to us, we greatly appreciate it. We think this will help Astoria a lot, so we look forward to your assistance on this. Okay, thank you. Is Zoran on in the backstage?
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay, I'd like to now bring out Zoran Mamdani, our new assembly person. I'd like to say he was great. He supported Old Astoria in the past, even when he was working in the housing and foreclosure and forbearance issues. I know he's gone on to bigger and better things in Albany. So we're very interested in hearing what his first impression is of Albany. He's just started this year and what's going on. So Zoran, please join us.
How's it going, Richard? Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind words. It's such a pleasure to be here, and to everyone who is watching. I look forward to the days when we can get back together as we were when we last met in person for monthly meetings. As Richard said, before I was the assembly person, I was working as a foreclosure prevention housing counselor, working with homeowners across our borough facing issues on their mortgage with forbearance and delinquency. Housing has been the focus of all my work and was the focus of the campaign and continues to be the focus of a lot of what I'm doing in Albany. And, it's been about 3.5 months that I've been in office, and we've just finished quite a bruising budget battle where there were, many victories, a good number of losses as well. But there were a couple of things I wanted to highlight to make sure that everybody knew, particularly to the interest of Oana, which is that there was $1 billion that was passed in the budget for small business relief, with a specific allocation of a few tens of millions to restaurants that were. Oh, I'm sorry, Richard. Can you hear me? I apologize.
Yes, I hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Here we are in the internet connection of the assembly office. But there was $1 billion approved for small business relief, and a specific amount of it was set aside, I think about $25 million, but it's still being allocated for neighborhoods that suffered under orange zone specifications. So that would be restaurants and small businesses that were forced to have different sets of restrictions because of the COVID rates in our neighborhoods. And parts of Astoria do fall under that. There was $2.4 billion that was approved for rent relief for tenants and landlords, with priorities for small landlords. And that is a really critically important issue, I think, for so many of us across this district, in terms of this would be money that would make a lot of both tenants and landlords whole in that it would be used towards paying up to 12 months of arrears as well as up to 3 months of future rent, so that people can get up to date on their debts, and that for landlords who haven't been able to pay their mortgage or whatever other obligations they have that are fiscal, this would allow them to do so. Additionally, there was a major breakthrough with regards to foundation aid, where for the first time in many, many years, the state has agreed to pay its court-ordered amount towards our schools across the state. And over the next 3 years, it will pay off that entire amount, starting with more than $1 billion this year. So these are some of the reflections I have from the budget process. But by and large, I leave Astoria every Sunday night to go up to Albany. I come back on Thursday nights. It's possible to do this all virtually, but I want to be up there and meeting my colleagues and doing as much work as possible, because I know that from January to June, while we have this legislative session, I should be working to be as effective and impactful as I can for our district. I know that Oana covers actually a portion of Oana's kind of constituency, I guess I would say, is outside of the district. I represent everything that is east of 12th Street. And there's a significant part of Astoria that is left out. Now, this next year, redistricting is occurring, and so that may be changed. We'll find out in about February. But those are some reflections from what's been happening in Albany. I have a number of pieces of legislation that have just been introduced that I'm going to be working on, trying to get through legislation that has to do with fairness in our elections, which has to do with fossil fuels and a real attempt to chart out a renewable future, and not one that leaves Astoria as Asthma Alley with the worst air pollution in the entire borough of Queens and the worst asthma rates as well. So those are some of the focuses thus far legislatively. And then there's been a lot of organizing that we've been doing, our office has been doing here. We are just here at 32nd Street and 24th Avenue, same office as my predecessor, and we're not currently accepting in-person appointments or walk-ins because of the pandemic, but we are here by our phones. And this, as you can see in the background, or this way rather, Stop the Astoria Power Plant. That's another piece of organizing that we've been focusing on, is dealing with NRG's proposal to build a new fossil fuel powered peaker plant in the north of our district. So I know that's a lot of things. I just wanted to jump in and give some reflections, but I'm very happy to be here and very thankful for all that you do, the advocacy you do. It really shouldn't take that many years to get street cleaning and that many years to get a speed bump, but honestly, it wouldn't happen without the work that you do. So I thank you for it.
One thing I can also tell you, we've recently changed our bylaws. We've increased the area that we're involved in, and we're actually now encompassing the entire area from Steinway Street and 19th Avenue, basically the entire waterfront from Steinway Street and up. And we want to include also the Steinway factory, the new wildflower plant. You have new sanitation down there, and going all the way down to the entire area west of 21st Street down to Queensbridge. So this has actually been the request of some individuals from those areas for us to expand our area. And to be honest with you, also, we probably have been the only civic that's been operating during the pandemic virtually. And so we've actually got, like I said before, involved in areas also like the business district and 30th Avenue and things like that, where people have asked us to come in about. So with that means that we're going to be working together a lot more than you think.
I'm very excited. That's an expectation I would love to exceed.
Good. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat and we can read them off. Let's see what we have. We have from Donna Kokoros. That's great news about the larger oh, that's to me. Well, thank you. Okay. Yes, well, let's see what happens. We're looking at it. By the way, I also want to take this opportunity to mention Victor Prado, who's our host, is helping us out a lot. And also our longtime web artist, I can call her, is Malika Schmidt. And also we have a new associate, Jessica Tercios, who's working with us now, and she's helping a lot, particularly with a lot of the grant applications, which are a bear, and they drive me nuts, particularly the ones from the government. Okay, but okay. Also, this is something that's interesting given tonight's program. I know that in Albany, there was recently, I was reading today, they're removing the and I'm not sure how this works, there's a federal program for opportunity zones. And since we're going to be having a discussion here on financing for development, if it's a federal program, how does the state able to stop it? And I mean, are they, and I'm assuming they're stopping it. This is what I saw on the paper today. Do you have any insights into this?
This was a proposal that I think was passed in the final budget, was to decouple opportunity zones with tax breaks. So I don't think the state can entirely stop what is a federal program, but I think it can ensure that there are no state incentives received alongside that. I can get back to you on exact specifics as to what it will mean with regards to opportunity zones across Queens and across the state. But I think it was something, it was to the tune of, I think, about $63 or $65 million was one of the costs that was associated with it. So let me just, I'm gonna get back to you on that, Richard, in terms of the exact specifics.
That'll be particularly interesting, and I hope you do stick with us to listen to the program. We've got a great speaker, a couple of speakers actually, and you know, one of the things having to do with development is that people are just not familiar with the roles banks and lenders play. Okay, they're a very, very important part of the whole structure. You can have all the great ideas in the world and be the most community-minded developer in the world, but if you can't get the financing, it just won't happen. So this is something for people to be very, very aware of. You have to put it in the equation of any decisions or any support you give for anything. So I do hope you stick around, and if you have questions. You know,
I wish, tonight I sadly cannot, but in the future I will definitely be sticking around for a meeting.
Okay, well, I also like to tell everybody that if you can't ever have to leave early, you just go to Facebook or to our website, and all of these presentations are recorded and you can view them after the fact. You just can't ask questions. But if you do have questions, just email us directly and we'll do our best to answer them. Okay, all right. Zoran, and anybody else have any questions?
Oh, Stacy has a question.
Stacy? Yes.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hey, Stacy.
Oh, by the way, this is Stacy Andriadakis. She's actually going to be working with us on the presentation on development finance. And so Stacy, she's a local community member and a great asset to Oana in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. And I thoroughly respect everything that you do. So thank you for having me. I do have a question about redistricting, which is occurring this year. Can you elaborate a little bit further about that process? Because I've always
Sorry, there's a motorcycle going by. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So redistricting happens every 10 years, and it is there's the technical process and then there's the political process. And I think it's important to know both of them. The technical process is that there is a redistricting commission, and that commission, I think, seats 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. And they are supposed to propose, they're supposed to agree on a redistricting proposal and then put it to the legislature to ratify it. Now, the nature of partisan politics is such that whichever party is in majority power typically rejects the commission's proposal, and they're allowed to reject it 3 times. And by the 3rd time, each time it's rejected, the commission is supposed to come back with a slightly altered proposal that responds to that feedback. But if the legislature rejects it 3 times, then the legislature can create their own districts. And so there are a number of concerns with that, as I'm sure you can understand from that. One is that this commission, in and of itself, as it is created, has not been given the appropriate funding by the governor. So they haven't been paid for quite a long period of time. And so they're quite reticent to do the work that is required, given that they haven't been given any money to do so. And we don't even know when they will propose these new lines, given that their funding hasn't even been sorted out. And this is part of the dysfunction of Albany. This is also part of the way in which the governor seeks to exert power and remind everyone that they're at the whims of his discretions. So what I would say is, if I was to play pundit for a minute, I would say that it's quite likely that it would not be until February of next year that we would see district lines for a race that would be contested in June. And so what that means is you will likely see a number of candidates declaring their candidacy for office without being able to say with certainty whether or not they will be in that district. Just today, we had a candidate declare for Congress against one of our congresswomen, Carolyn Maloney. The candidate is Rana Abdelhamid. And the state will also be determining congressional lines. So it's not just state assembly, state senate, it's also congressional lines. And then there's also the question of the census, that we've lost population, and so we would have to lose, I think it's 2 congressional seats. Then it's up to the state also. So there are all these political ramifications of which Congress people will lose their seats, where will the districts be drawn, how will they draw the assembly districts, the Senate districts, and that's why, with all of that in mind, that's also why there's a stipulation in an election year around redistricting that allows candidates to run from anywhere in the county, not in the district. It doesn't have to be in the district because the district is yet to be decided. In other years, you have to live in the district for at least 1 year before declaring your candidacy. So those are some of the things. I wish it wasn't this way. There isn't much influence that any individual member has. It's very much a leadership-driven process in both bodies.
So,
I have a, go ahead, Stacey.
yes, I guess my follow-up to all of that would be, so as a community member, it sounds like there's not really much any one person can do in reference to this process.
I think I usually would push back on that analysis because I really want it to be part of my political work to create as much power as possible in the hands of ordinary people in our district. So I would say that while you may be correct today, in the work that I'm going to be trying to do is figuring out what the pressure points are in Albany and how we can exert influence over them to ensure that it's as fair and transparent of a process as possible. At this point, it hasn't even come up yet, but I would say that the commission is supposed to give its first proposal in the fall. And so I would say, in let's say September or so, I'll hopefully have a better understanding of how we can keep this process honest and how we can ensure that it's not simply just a way to curry and buy favor in different points as it has been in the past.
Will there be a public hearing or, one thing that I found, obviously, in trying to make changes, it's taking a lot of time, is number one, media, which is if there's anything that politicians will listen to, it's media.
Yep.
And the other thing is, will there be public hearings on this, where the public can actually come in and comment on the districts as they're drawn, or make on each particular level? Yes, okay. The political power or party says that they want these changes. Can there be a public hearing for the public to put in their thoughts? I mean, I'm very, this is with the city council, but I've never understood why the districts are, the waterfront in this area is in Jimmy Van Bramer's district, and then the rest of it's all Costa.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing at the state level, which is that every piece of public housing has been cut out of my district.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Those are all people who live in Astoria.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They're in Astoria houses, but they're not represented by an Astorian elected official.
Exactly.
It furthers the kind of isolation of individuals and institutions. But I think that a public hearing is possible, and what I'm going to follow up on, it would be related, I think, to the commission's proposal. If it comes back to the legislature deciding, then my understanding, very, very based on a very brief time there, is that it wouldn't come with a hearing. But I'm going to figure out both opportunity zone details as well as the details on whether there would be a public hearing, and I'm going to get back to you on both of those things.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much.
There's one other thing on the chat that says, okay, Eden Radoncic, they're essentially looking to cut at the development tax abatement 421A, especially in connection to Oz. Okay, Astoria will likely feel the effects of this due to the high price of developed land. Okay, I'm assuming that has to do with the opportunity zones. Oh, OZ was opportunity zones. So that's a comment there that you can actually take with you, and maybe if you come back with something on that, we can elaborate on that.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Richard.
We have to start the next part of the program, but thanks for coming. We hope to see you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, we are a little bit behind, so I'd like to now, I'm privileged actually to bring up Leon Hovsepian. Okay, he's he's teaching at New York University in finance and development. And if we could bring Leon up, he's actually got a presentation. And I'd also like to bring up again Stacy Andriadakis, okay, who will also be helping us with this program. Stacy, like I said before, she's got her master's in finance and real estate finance. She's also a community member, and I've asked her to help out with some of the questioning and things like that. But the focus will be on Leon. Leon, he's going to tell a little bit about his background. I know he spent many years with HPD in New York City, and he's also been strong in the academic world and also in the private sector. So Leon, take it away. Oh, one thing I do want to say is before we start that, as I said previously to Zoran, understanding the finance behind real estate and behind developers is essential if people are going to make the right decisions, okay? People have to understand the pressures that developers are under. Many of them I've known in the past have wanted to give more back to the community, but have been unable to because the finance just doesn't work. So I think everybody needs to understand that, and political pressure and public pressure needs to be applied accordingly. It's not just the developers. You have to also look at the banks, the lenders, the government, some of the issues that happens with operational procedures, the time it takes to get things done by government. All of these things affect whether a project's going to be viable. So listen to Leon, ask questions, and remember the points he makes when you make your decisions about whether to support a project or not. Okay, thank you, Leon.
Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate it. I very much applaud what you're doing here and having these conversations just to make people more informed and kind of share some knowledge and invite these conversations. I think they're very important to have, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to share my screen now, the presentation deck. Hopefully this works for everybody. All right. Seems to be working, right?
Is that the full screen? Yes. Okay.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again, Richard. So I'm going to give a quick background, a little bit about myself to add to what Richard mentioned. But really what we're going to be talking about today is how finance affects the creation of housing and real estate development. So my background, I've kind of had a few different roles in different aspects of real estate. I currently work for a company called Vertical Community Development, which is kind of a relatively new entity that's the development arm for Omni-Build Construction. We do affordable housing, market rate housing, often mixed use projects with a store or a church or a community facility at the base. So personally, as I kind of mentioned and Richard alluded to, I've been in the private and the public sector and kind of bounced between the two. Most recently, I worked for New York City's Department of Housing Preservation and Development for 7 years. I worked in asset management there, and I headed up a group for 4 years in development that did credit and special underwriting. So trying to understand kind of the pros and cons of projects and make sure that they're underwritten in an effective way and make sure it's a good deal for the city. And that was really kind of my focus, trying to find ways to minimize the subsidy need. So the additional amount of money that the city needs to put in to create affordable housing, which then allows us to create more affordable housing. And then I took that kind of skill set and I've kind of trying to do it with a developer and help them build affordable housing. So kind of gone from assisting from the city's perspective to doing it myself with a builder. While I was with the city, I probably reviewed about 600 affordable housing projects, and we probably put about somewhere in the order of $4 billion worth of subsidy into projects over that time. And then since then, I've been teaching, as Richard mentioned, at NYU Wagner, so the School of Public Policy, Public Service, and Columbia's GSAP program, the graduate school there for architecture, planning, and preservation. So a little bit about my background, just so you know where I'm coming from, and I kind of go back and forth from the developer side to the city side. But fundamentally, I care a lot about affordable housing. All right, so for today's discussion, we'll be talking about what's required to develop real estate. We're going to be focusing on multifamily, so commercial, typically larger projects from 10 to 200 units is kind of what we focus on. And mixed use projects, meaning that we have residential as well as commercial components to those. We're going to talk about a little bit who's involved, how finance drives development. We'll get into some of the nuts and bolts about debt and equity and how those work. And at a very high level, again, we'll talk about sources and uses of funding and how that all comes together to make a project possible. And then we'll go through some examples of here's a project that works and kind of what happens to the financing when certain externalities occur and make things more difficult. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. So what's required to develop real estate? Kind of the starting point. What do we have? What do we need? Well, it really starts with an idea. So it's an idea, a program, a plan that has to, first of all, be physically possible. It has to be legally permissible. And when you say legally, that means zoning. It means any sort of laws and restrictions on a site. And then it has to be financially feasible. That's what we're going to talk about mostly today, is that financial feasibility. We're kind of assume that 1 and 2 have already been done. And then the next thing that typically a developer looks at is what's the highest and best use. It's a term that gets abused, I think, quite frequently. But fundamentally, it's as long as those 3 conditions are met, what else does the project do? Is it meeting a mission? Are you a mission-based developer that's trying to create affordable housing or create a community facility for a certain group? Or maybe for your own organization, you're trying to build something where you have a space to do whatever your work is. Or is it more financial? Is it generating profits by delivering some needed service to a neighborhood? Now, it has to be based on a need, because otherwise your project won't be successful. So is that more rental housing? Is it more home ownership opportunities? Is it retail amenities? Is it grocery stores? Is it pharmacies, restaurants? These are all important things. And everybody looks at these a little bit differently, which makes it kind of an interesting space to work in. But this is kind of a starting point. So now this is an iterative process to make something possible. Typically, you start with that idea. You do a lot of study on the market and on the site. You develop a program, you refine that program, and then you do some modeling. And we'll show you very briefly a typical, very basic underwriting model that we all use. And a lot of us use similar models. But often it doesn't work in the first go-around or the second go-around or the 7th go-around. So you kind of go back to the drawing board and try to tweak your idea and do some more market study and refine it until finally, hopefully, you get a project that is able to move forward. So this should look confusing. It's meant to look confusing. There's a lot of parts involved and a lot of critical elements to make a real estate project possible. Now, I'm not expecting anybody to memorize this. There's no quiz at the end, so don't worry. But fundamentally, what we're trying to get to here, and we have a simplification slide coming up in the next slide. But there's a lot of pieces, and they all have to work. This has to work for everyone. If any of these components don't work or they don't want to participate in this, then you don't have a project. So just trying to show what's involved, and we can kind of go into a little more detail in this next tab. So key stakeholders, let's start with the users. Are you creating something that people want to use? Is it attractive to renters or homeowners or to retailers, to the market, whatever market you're trying to target? You have to make something that they're going to want to use in the end. You have to design it that way. You have to work with your builder. A lot of times there's kind of cost engineering, value engineering to try to say, okay, well, the price that they're giving me just doesn't work. It's not going to pencil out in the end, but can they build it? And you kind of go back and forth for what sort of, if you can cut some corners or if you can, find ways to create more value. And so you're working with your builder very, hopefully right from the start. Then we're getting into debt and equity. So how are we financing this whole thing? Lenders are in general risk averse. So they need to have a high level of confidence that their loan's going to be repaid. They're expecting this to be a safe investment. And if at any point in time they feel like there's something that doesn't make sense and it's not safe, well, then their lending terms are going to change, or they're just not going to be willing to lend. Likewise for equity, equity is kind of a higher point in the risk kind of profile of a project. So really, they're having to make an assessment of what is the risk of this at their level, and does this make sense? And does the return that is being projected compensate them for the risk? Is that going to work for them? So that's kind of a big question. And then, of course, you have the public agencies that are often involved. You have public officials and communities. So communities usually reach out to their local officials. The local officials usually reach out to the agencies. And, there's a lot of things that have to happen. With public sites, so when I was in the public sector working for HPD, then there's a lot of involvement. So every level of local electeds kind of get involved and say, how do they feel about the project? Do they want to support it going forward? It's not just the local councilman or the community board or the borough president. It's kind of all the way through. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of weigh in on projects, especially in public land. Other sites can be as of right and there's less involvement, but still, as a developer, you don't want to be trying to build something in a community that doesn't want what you're trying to build. So you're trying to make it work for everybody because it's just going to work so much better. So the question is, can everybody get what they really require? Now, there's what they want, but can they get what they require? Because if they can't get that, then the project's not going to move forward. And the developer's role is to try to make it work for everybody. So they really have to care about what everybody thinks and everybody's perspective and what everybody's requirements are. And it's a challenging role. Put it that way. So going to the next slide, now it's challenging for market rate development, but there's even more players and more parties involved in affordable housing. So with affordable housing, you've got one of the problems is, fundamentally, what are you trying to do? You're trying to build housing and then severely restrict the rents. So it's affordable to a wider group of people in the community. So what do you have to do if you're restricting rents? You're going to decrease your net operating income, and we'll define that in a few minutes. And the income that comes off a project is going to be lessened. Therefore, you need a lot of other sources to make this possible. So you have municipal bonds that get involved to help finance these things through HDC, our sister agency, the Housing Development Corporation. You have private institutions that have to give private debt and credit enhancement, letters of credit. You have tax credit equity investors and syndicators that put deals together. You have a ton of lawyers for every party involved. And then you have a lot of other groups like HCR, the state organization. You have often NYCHA gets involved in some projects or contributes some land to build affordable housing on. You have HUD that gets involved and puts up a lot of the financing behind this. And that's all the other stuff. Then you've got your basic developer, borrower, owner, and you've got your design and construction team. So it's a lot of people that get involved in these things. So now we're going to kind of step back and look at some basic fundamentals. Now this is kind of going back to typical market rate development, which is, believe it or not, much simpler. Typically, you've got 2, maybe 3 different sources of financing to make these projects work. You have the fundamental building blocks of your finances, debt and equity. So what's the difference? Well, debt is a secured loan. So it's coming from banks, funds. It can come from a lot of different groups. But the big thing is it's secured by the property. So if, and sometimes also personal guarantees on the developer or development team. So what does that mean? That means if you don't make your debt service payments, that the bank or lender can come in and step in and take your project away. Everything else, everybody else loses everything. So if there's equity invested or whatever the developers put in or equity investors, all that's gone because the debt comes first. So it's very important to pay your debt service. The next is equity. So equity is invested capital, non-secured capital. So it comes from investors, and there's a wide range of investors. Often it starts with the developer themselves putting in whatever they can kind of scrounge together. It often involves friends and family or colleagues, and any kind of partner you can come up with, investors, funds, but it requires a higher return. So it's a higher level of risk, but therefore higher returns are required to attract that capital. So unsecured, structured through, typically you have an operating agreement, you create, often you create a company, a limited liability company, that then will have these contracts that will specify how profits are shared, if there are profits. And then that gets structured and everybody signs into that. But again, like I mentioned, they're riskier investments, so they require higher rates of return. And from the project's perspective, the more equity that's needed, it means that your cost of capital becomes higher. Debt comes at a cheaper price. Equity is at a higher price. So you're trying to get as much debt as you can in to bring down your average cost of capital, the equity. And how do you figure out how much of both of these you can get? It's this concept of NOI, net operating income. That's what we're going to define next. So now this might look like a lot. We're kind of dipping our toe into a bit of academia here. The terms on the left there are kind of industry jargon, what we kind of call things. And on the right, it's in simple terms, really, what are we talking about here? So first of all, what do we use this for? So it's a key measure of income coming from a project, and it's used to size debt, attract equity, and also value a project. So those are the three things you're using this for. It's a basic level of cash flow out of a project. So how do you measure this? You start with something called gross potential income, which is just your top line rents, retail rents, residential rents, parking income, any kind of gross high level income that comes from the project. That's gross potential income. Then you subtract out your vacancy. So you may not have a 100% occupied building. It might be 95% or 90%. You might have a commercial unit that isn't rented for an extra year because they tend to be harder to rent. So you have a vacancy loss. And when you subtract out that vacancy loss, you get to your gross effective income, which is the income that's actually collected. So that's really how much money you have to play with once a project is up and operating. So the next thing is you have to pay your operating expenses. So that's all the cost to maintain a project. It's the repair cost, it's the utility cost, it's staffing, real estate taxes, everything you need to pay to kind of keep your project maintained and performing. And when you subtract that out, you get to this measure called net operating income. So that's really what's left to pay your debt service or pay to your equity. And Richard and Stacy, feel free to jump in if at any point you have any questions or you want to slow me down or speed me up or whatever. I'll let you guys have the accelerator, so just let me know.
Okay, well, keep going. I think the main thing to take out of the last slide to me is that that I didn't know was the fact that your actual financing charges, the mortgages and or whatever loans you take out, are not included in determining that income. So, which I had always assumed they were. So that's interesting for me.
Right, and we'll show on another model a little bit later where that comes out. So right after this net operating income, you pull out your debt service for paying your debt and any capital expenses, and then you get to a cash flow. And that's really probably what you were thinking of, is cash flow. So, all right. So moving along. So for debt financing, we'll get into a little more detail here about debt and equity. So debt is sized through underwriting, that we'll show in a minute, and lending standards. So lenders have two fundamental measures that they use to size debt. When we say size debt, that means to take a project's underwriting, look at the underwriting and say, okay, if the project costs $100, I'd be willing to lend $80 or $50 or whatever it is. So loan to value is that. It's basically saying that the loan is limited by whatever the collateral's value is. If once it's built, it's worth $100. Loan to value of 80% means they would only lend $80 at most. And then it's also restricted by something called a debt service coverage ratio. So debt service is what you need to pay on a loan. Coverage ratio basically says how much extra money do you need, so extra NOI do you need to cover your debt. So they're not going to let you just barely cover your debt. They're going to want a safety cushion. So that safety cushion is a debt service coverage ratio, which typically is anywhere from 1.3, so a 30% kind of coverage, down to maybe 1.15 in the affordable housing world, because that's being lent by mission-based lenders, the city, who has a mission to create affordable housing. So they'll be more aggressive at trying to help projects take on debt and finance affordable housing, but only if it's meeting their mission. So those are the two measures. Projects NOI that we just went through is used for both. Fundamentally, a higher NOI means they can take on more debt because it's going to be a higher value. Higher NOI will get to a higher value, so the loan to value will increase. And also higher NOI means a higher debt service amount that will be allowed when you divide it by your debt service coverage ratio. So I don't mean to get into too detailed there, but yeah, so we'll try to kind of run through this. So debt service is the cost of borrowing that involves both interest and repayment of the principal. There's two components to debt service. Now, a senior debt, you'll hear a lot of times we'll talk about senior debt. That's the first position debt, so that's the safest debt. Now, since it's safest, it's the cheapest, and that could start at borrowing rates of about 3.5%. Now, if you're borrowing at 3.5%, you're going to have to pay a little bit more than that because you're also repaying some of your principal balance. But debt rates right now are close to all-time lows, so you want to get as much debt as you can into projects. But riskier debt, if you need more debt, is called subordinate debt, or sometimes called mezzanine debt. Now that might be if the senior lender is only willing to put in 65% of the loan to value. Riskier debt might put in another 10%, get you up to 75%. So for that 10% tranche of debt, you might have to pay 10 to 15% for that. So it becomes very expensive money. Let's see, moving on to equity. So equity is attracted, again, through healthy underwriting. You don't want to be overly aggressive. And just like you're underwriting, the developer's doing underwriting, well, the lender's doing underwriting, and the equity investors are doing underwriting. Everyone involved is doing underwriting. And everybody has their own version of these things. So you might not always agree, but you have to do whatever you feel comfortable with. So it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. But again, NOI is going to be first used to pay debt service because that has to be paid. Otherwise, they can foreclose on the project. What's left over is called cash flow, getting back to what Richard mentioned. So that can go to investors, developers, owners, partners, according to that operating agreement that we mentioned a little bit earlier. So healthy returns are needed relative to perceived risk, and that's what's going to attract investors. But equity typically for a fairly safe project needs to be in the 10 to 25% range. Why? Because it's risky. So you kind of think of where bank rates are. If you have your money in a bank account, you're making next to nothing. It seems like a really high number, but you're going to get your money out of the bank. And with equity returns, there's a much higher risk profile. So let's continue on. So we're going to talk a little bit now about sources and uses of funds. So what are uses of funds? Well, uses of funds are anything you have to spend money on to develop real estate. So what do you need to do? If you're building something, you need to buy the land. That's the acquisition. You have hard costs. That is the construction, materials, labor that go into building something, bricks and sticks. Soft costs, all the professional fees and financing costs that go into it. Architects, engineers, legal fees, lenders, construction interest, and everything else that you need to cover and pay for while you're building this project that might take 2 to 3 years to build. There's a lot of cost there. And then sometimes a developer fee. Depending on the project, it might warrant a developer fee or it might not. So these are all the costs. And now, how do we pay for them? Well, we have sources. So there's this concept called capital stack. So a capital stack is really the combination of all the financing sources that you need to put together to be able to fund your budget, your total development cost that we saw on the previous slide. So let's start on the right side here, actually, with market rate. Market rate is a bit simpler. You have a first mortgage, you might have a second mortgage, a mezzanine mortgage, a subordinated mortgage. And then you have developer equity. You're always going to need some developer equity, and that could be anywhere from 10% to 50%. For affordable housing, it's much tougher, because that first mortgage, remember, the rents are much lower. If the rents are lower, the mortgage that you're going to be able to size is going to be much lower. So instead of covering 50 to 90% of your budget, it's probably only going to cover 10 to 30% of your budget. In addition, you're going to need subordinate mortgages, and those are usually coming from the city or some sort of mission-based group. You have this LIHTC equity. LIHTC stands for Low Income Housing Tax Credits. So a lot of times you hear people talking about housing tax credits. These are a hugely important source of financing for affordable housing. They're responsible for covering, creating approximately 90% of the low-income affordable housing across the country since it was put into place, enacted back in 1986. So that's a hugely critical tool to create affordable housing.
Leon?
Yes.
Just for I know this is a very in-depth subject, so kind of on a superficial level here, how competitive are we talking about applications being approved here in terms of low-income housing tax credits?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that. So, I've worked in affordable housing, and it's getting harder and harder to get these. So right now, if you're a developer with a track record and a proven track record of being able to build or develop, and you wanted to bring a project to the city right now, there's such a backlog to get these limited resources that the city has that you're likely going to have to wait a minimum of 2 years, potentially even longer, to get these. So you need to control your site and then just sit on it for 2 years in the best conditions to be able to get ready to finance this. So it's a long wait. Affordable housing takes a long time to build. And in the interim, are your pockets deep enough to hold on to that site? Whatever you've spent, if you've bought the site, right? Because if you bought it for affordable housing, typically the seller isn't necessarily just going to sell it to you for affordable prices. They're going to want whatever the price of the land is. So you're buying a market rate site that you're sitting on to build affordable housing, and it might take you 2-3 years to get to the queue. So it's tough.
Property taxes you're not getting a tax abatement while you're carrying it during that application process, are you?
No, you are not. So you're paying tax. That's a big carry cost. I mean, hopefully there's something productive that you can do. There's, something that you can do there. But, typically maybe it's a parking lot, or maybe it's a, one-story building. It's not going to generate a lot of income. And you need to kind of ride the storm. And it's really hard to do. So a lot of people can't do that, or they need to find ways to bring in partners to do that with. So it's tricky.
Thank you.
So this is one question. This is, you're talking about the subordinate mortgage from the city or the federal, the LIHTC? Which are you discussing here?
Both, but especially, so basically the city, HPD and HDC, now this is from the city side. Now HCR from the state side also has kind of a parallel program, but I'm going to focus more on the city programs because that's what I know best. So speak to what I know. And there's a team of people in development. Development at HPD is approximately 400 people that dedicate their lives to trying to make projects work and try to build more affordable housing in the city and keep up with the mayor's plan to build 300,000 units of housing, build or preserve 300 units of housing over a 10-year period of time, or I think it's up to a 13-year period of time now. So it's a lot of people committed to doing this. Now, the LIHTC equity, the 4% tax credits, and I'm going to go into a little bit of a deep dive here, so I apologize, but I'm probably going to get a lot of questions. They require volume cap bonds. So those are a limited resource that are doled out from the federal government to the states, and then from the state, there's a sub-allocation that goes to HDC, and the state has an allocation as well. So those are in hot demand. And so you really need to wait to get up the queue to be able to get that LIHTC equity ready. Once that's ready, the city then will kind of look at how much subsidy they have available and try to piece together and work with the developer to try to make these things work. So these things come in at the same time, and at times the volume cap is a bigger constraint. And in other times, for example, when COVID hit, the mayor had to reprioritize a lot of the budget and focus on COVID, emergencies and trying to figure out, are we better off building more hospitals than building more affordable housing? So a lot of projects get put on hold because of the subsidy need. Otherwise, LIHTC equity has been a short supply. So both of those are huge factors, and they're both really critically needed. So, but I was talking about LIHTC before, but the subsidy is also a highly sought after in very limited resource. $1 billion sounds like a lot of money, but with what the agenda is, and with the cost of what it is to build these things, it's really just barely enough to kind of do what they're trying to do.
I hate to put you on the spot here, and you probably can't answer this because it's a little arbitrary, but, if a regular citizen's looking at a project, okay, and they want to know whether they're going to support a project as an affordable, or even if it is as an affordable, what level of affordability. The time frame here, the 2 to 3 years, what percentage of the cost to the developer can that end up being? I mean, I want to get an idea only because the longer something is fought over and, held up, is actually, in a sense, increasing the cost of each apartment to the renter. Because, and at the end of the day, they won't be able to give the same level of affordability. What can be done so that the city can expedite this process? Because it's not really the developer's fault. It needs to be expedited. That would, almost be a solution a little more elegant than, just trying to, hit the developer and the banks over the head to lend more money, or to accept a smaller rate of return.
And that's a really tricky question. I mean, I agree. I mean, there are a lot of checks and balances, and, when you're dealing with Department of Building, you're dealing with HPD, you're dealing with city planning, these are huge agencies that, are very complex, and there are reasons that safeguards are put in place, but all of these things take time. There's plan reviews, there's, a review of the design, there's a review of costs. There's a lot of checks and balances that are put in place to make sure that the city is using these massive investments they're making in affordable housing, using them efficiently and responsibly. It's a big responsibility to have this city capital that we're using to build affordable housing or anything else, or bridges or tunnels or roads. It's a big responsibility. You want to make sure that you have as transparent a process as possible, as fair a process, and as efficient a process as possible. But, those kind of weigh against each other, time versus making sure you're doing things responsibly. And it's a tricky game that, we try to do, but we don't do it perfectly. So
it's hard because, in a sense, the striving to make something efficient is by its own nature inefficient.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we're doing a project now in the Bronx that we're building 100% senior housing, 100% affordable over a church. And it's going through city planning for this rezoning incredibly slowly. Things that used to take 45 days are taking multiples of that. So I know everybody's working as hard as they can. Everybody's doing what they can do, but it doesn't always work as it should. So, we all kind of have to figure a way to hold on longer and adjust and change our performers and change our projections and do the best we can. But it's tricky. So there are a lot of challenges in this. As you saw, all of those players that get involved, everyone has different needs and different complications and different things going on with their agencies and their organizations and their constituents. So these are complicated things.
They are, but I do hope our politicians, if any of them are still listening, take this to heart. It is actually something, if it's addressed, could really solve a lot of issues for people. So.
I agree. All right, I'm going to jump to the next slide. So financial feasibility. So once you kind of do all of this assessment, you study the market, you do this research, you make some projections, you make some assumptions, you find out where banks are lending, you figure out where equity might be able to be enticed to come into a project. You figure out costs, all of the stuff. You need to start doing some underwriting. And the big question is, are returns sufficient to entice investment? So everyone has to work for everybody. So for the banks, for the local electeds, for the constituents, for HPD if it's affordable housing, for everybody. And then you have to consider the risk and return. So there's always risk to these projects. Lenders have a certain risk profile. Investors have a different risk profile. And then you as a developer have to have a risk profile as well. Does it make sense? So then you have to make a decision. Once you do the underwriting, you have to decide, okay, does this work for everybody right now at this moment in time? And it's a snapshot in time because all of these variables are constantly changing. So is it time to go forward? Can we make a run for it and move forward? Or do we need to go back and revise our strategy? Or is this just too far off that it's never going to work? And those are the questions that developers have to ask themselves. And everyone involved asks themselves, lenders ask themselves this about the project. Investors do as well. So with that, we're going to talk about a few examples. So this is going to get a little bit detailed. So we're going to kind of take a deep dive in, and then we're going to jump back out. So I just want to let you know kind of what's behind the scenes on some of the stuff, but then we're going to bring it up to the surface and try to just talk about it at a fairly high level. So here's an example. So we've got a 20-unit building. We've done the market research. We know that we can build 20 units because of the zoning. We've worked with our architect. We've done some layouts. We think that these are a good size unit for the neighborhood. Market rents, we believe that the average rent should be $2,500 per unit per month. We've talked to banks, and it looks like financing terms are about 4% with a 30-year amortization, 80% LTV, 1.25 debt service coverage ratio. I know I'm going through this quickly. So we understand the financing terms, and then we have to make a bunch of assumptions. Okay, what are rents going to grow at? Who knows that? Do I ask the bank? Do I ask an appraiser? Nobody knows, but we basically try to use something that seems reasonable, looking at history, past history, and looking forward. Now, rent growth could be negative 10% one year, but hopefully at some point it kind of catches up, and eventually, I'm assuming we're averaging 2% and averaging expense growth at 2%. But again, all of these are assumptions or snapshots in time of what we think they might be. So once we do this, the next thing is to put it into a model. So we all have development models, underwriting models, kind of like this. And this is an extremely simple one, just a snapshot. So we basically take all that information that I put forward before. We build out that NOI that we described with the gross potential income, vacancy, expenses, and we get to an NOI. Then we can size from NOI, we can size how much debt service we can afford to pay, and therefore how much debt we can get. Then we figure out how much equity, therefore, we still need to put in. So in this example, based on the assumptions that we had, we're going to need to put in 1.3 million of equity up front to buy the site. And we're going to, so can you guys see my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to need to put in 1.3 million of equity. That's about 20%. So I think it's the total cost of this, if I remember right, was 6.6 million. So we have 5.3 million of debt. We're going to finance that with mostly debt, 80% debt. Then we're going to get the cash flows over time. And after 10 years, so we're assuming a 10-year hold, we're going to sell it. So selling is called reversion. We have to pay off the debt balloon that's remaining, which is 4.2 million. We also have to pay our real estate broker. We don't want to forget to pay our real estate broker. And so the net proceeds that are left are roughly 3.6 million. We add that to the year 10 cash flow of another 172,000, and we get 3.77. So overall, this is the profile. And we have big money in, we have a little bit coming out, and finally we get our money back when we sell. And that works out to just under a 17% internal rate of return, which is kind of our return metric. And that's what we're going to use to kind of evaluate whether or not this project is viable or not. So that was the deep dive. Now we're kind of jumping back out. Let's kind of simplify this a little bit. So back to our model inputs and our model outputs, the results. So we put those things in. We said, how many units, what's the rent, vacancy rate, growth rates, expenses. We make debt assumptions of 4% and kind of these different debt terms. And all these in general are kind of roughly where the market is right now on a typical theoretical small project. And then what comes out of this? Well, we can build our NOI. So this is kind of all done in that spreadsheet. So we get gross rents of $600,000 and our NOI is $400,000. And based on that, with the 10-year hold, as I mentioned, we were able to size $5.3 million of debt is available to us, and we want to maximize that because that's the cheapest financing that we have for our capital stack. But we still have a gap of another $1.3 million that we need to put equity in. And with that equity and with the full payout, paying back our debt, in the end, the results are we have a 16.8% return, and our hurdle rate is 15%. So guess what? We have a project that works. So fantastic. We can move forward on this one.
Leon, just quickly, we're assuming $2,500 of rent per month per unit at a market rate, right?
Yeah, this is a market rate. So this is assuming a market rate project. So just for simplicity's sake, affordable housing would be much more complicated. And we'll touch on a little bit later as in one of the examples of what it would be like to take a market rate project and just make it affordable rent. So we'll kind of be able to kind of see what happens in that scenario in a few minutes.
Okay.
So again, this is a market rate project, just debt and equity and what it would look like. And we have a project that works. So now let's see what happens next. So let's say in our first example, lending tightens. What does it mean to tighten lending? Well, if the lending terms tighten, it basically means that a bank is less willing to lend in the way they were lending before. So they're going to be more conservative. So the two ways they can be more conservative are changing their loan to value, making it lower. Instead of loaning 80% of the value, now they're only going to lend 50% of their value, or changing their debt service coverage ratio. Instead of a coverage of 1.25, maybe they want a coverage of 1.5. So both of those would reduce how much debt a bank is willing to contribute to a project. So in this case, what happens when, and now this is not far off, right? I mean, let's think what happened with COVID. With COVID, for a while there, for about 6 months, the banks pretty much just pulled out and were no longer lending at all. And then when they did kind of come back in the market, first position lenders were lending only to about 45% loan to value. So these are like real kind of conditions. This isn't like some crazy Armageddon scenario. This is kind of what's recently happened. So so now if they're only lending 50% loan to value, then for our $6.6 million purchase, we need half of that financed with debt, and half of it has to come from equity. So we went from putting in 1.3 million to putting in 3.3 million, but all the returns are still the same, right? We're not making, the project isn't stronger in any way. It's just that we have less debt. So what happens to our return on equity? Well, it's going to go down. So by changing loan to value, reducing it from 80% down to 50%, now we need more equity, and therefore returns went from 16.8%, almost 17%, to almost 10%. Now, if our hurdle was 15%, guess what? We no longer have a project here. So back to the drawing board. So now we're back in that iterative loop. Now, let me know if you have any questions, or let's move to the next.
I do, really quickly. So from a developer standpoint, the developer may be willing to make that 10%, but his or her, their equity partners aren't. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, the developer is kind of has the highest risk. The money they're putting in is usually in the last position because it's their project. They have the most control, and they should have the most incentive to make sure it's a successful project. Most developers anyway don't have deep enough pockets to kind of fund every project. So they really need to go out and seek capital, seek investors. And that's where you really have partners. You have lending partners, you have equity partners, and that's what's required to make it work. So The developer is even a more tenuous position than even the equity investors, your typical equity investors. But on some projects, the developer is the equity investor if it's a small enough project or the developer is big enough. All right, so let's go to example 2. Okay, so the last one is a change in financing, like lending conditions. So now let's say politically up in Albany, they decide that that affordable New York tax exemption program, which used to be called the 421A program, that Zoran was talking about a little bit, and hopefully we'll find a little more information about, it's going to expire next June. So it's called sunsetting. So when it comes up for renewal, there's always a little bit of political debate about what should happen. What's the right thing to happen? Should it be tweaked? Should it just end? Should it be completely redesigned? So there was a pretty major redesign back in 2015. And now it's kind of coming up and it looks like it's going to be changed again. But let's be extreme and say, let's say it completely ends. So now instead of an incentive for building new housing, because 421A only applies to new construction, let's say that goes away. And now, as soon as you build it, you need to pay full real estate taxes. Well, taxes, typically on a project like this might be 25% of your gross income. So that's $7,500 per unit based on this income. So 25% of your gross rent. If you add that to the $8,500 that was already in our expense base, now you're talking about expenses of $15,000 per unit per year. So our gross income didn't change, our vacancy didn't change, our expenses have gone way up now. So they've almost doubled. So what's happened to our NOI? Well, it used to be 400,000 going back a slide, and now going forward a slide, now it's 270,000. So it's much lower. What does lower NOI mean? Well, the first result is it means lower debt is available. So instead of having 5.3 million of debt, now we're down to $3.8 million of debt. It also means that all the income coming off the project is lower. So all the returns are lower, and the valuation when you're ready to sell is also lower. So now we've got, so expenses have nearly doubled, but that's decreased NOI a bunch, and debt is decreased. So now we need more equity. Instead of 1.3 million of equity, we need 2.9 million of equity. So hope you have that ready. And the return on equity is less than 1%. So if you're a developer, a sponsor trying to put a deal together, and you're going out to the market and saying, hey, will anybody lend me equity? My project is going to basically make 1% interest. You are going to hear crickets. So no one is going to invest in your project, and nobody's going to. If you went forward, you wouldn't lose any money, but it's 10 years of your life and you haven't made any money. You're just basically finally at the end of the day getting your money back. So that doesn't work for a lot of people. And so you don't have a project here.
I have one question for you. When they have these changes, like in the 421A or different things like what we discussed before with, those zones, with the opportunity zones,
yes.
Do they normally are they grandfathered so that people that already started, that based all their original assumptions and plans on a certain number, all of a sudden get the, carpet pulled out from underneath them, and all of a sudden it's an unviable project? When they maybe been carrying the financing for a couple of years and all of a sudden something disappears. How does that historically work? I know that I remember when the 421A was up for renewal last time, I know everything stopped around here. All the development that I saw just ceased. So
that's exactly right. Now with the opportunity zones, that's really interesting, and I don't think anybody's figured out how that's going to work yet. They were a little bit slow rolling out exactly details on all the rules. It's a new program, so any new program takes some time for people to understand what it is and to kind of buy in and to be able to kind of move it forward. So opportunity zones are still new, so I can't really speak on that, how that would work. Mm-hmm. But I can say for 421A last time, like what you were talking about, I believe it was December of 2015. is when it last sunset. And at that point, if you were a developer or had a project and you were able to get one footing in the ground, then you were grandfathered in. So you needed an approved building permit, you need to have it signed off, and you need to put one footing in the ground. So I had a place just around the corner from me that I would walk by every day. There was a development site that was basically a big hole in the ground that had one footing in the middle of it, and that was it. And I knew exactly why they put that there, because that was for 421A. So they were grandfathered in the old program. And because of that, the new program was more restrictive. So the old program required about 20% affordable housing to get that. And now the minimum is typically around 25% or even 30% affordable housing to warrant this exemption, this tax exemption. So by doing that, a lot of people did that. And then when it sunset, and there was a period of time for, I can't remember, close to a year, I think, where the politicians couldn't agree what should happen, nothing happened. So everything.
And everybody had that financing for that extra year.
Right. So that was kind of it. It kind of killed development for a while. And that could happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So so this is kind of what happens in an extreme situation if all of a sudden the project is gone. Now, what would really happen? Well, land prices will adjust as well. So land becomes worthless. If you can't get 421A, land prices will come down a little bit, but not fully, and it'll be slow to happen. So in the period of time that the market readjusts, which takes a while, nothing's really going to transact because developers aren't going to be willing to pay for that land and realize, and landowners aren't realizing that their land is worth that much more. So finally, eventually, it'll kind of come into the middle, and it'll, transactions and projects will continue forward, but it takes a while. So it's a disruption in the market is really what's going to happen short term. So now let's go to our third example, which is kind of dealing with kind of a shortcut for affordable housing. So here, let's say we are a mission-based developer and we just want to buy a building and we just want to make affordable housing. We're not going to wait for the city to take 3 years to kind of put a financing package together. And it can be shorter in other programs, but if we needed tax credits, it would take a long time. How do we do this? So we were a mission-based group. A lot of times there's not-for-profits trying to do this. And we're going to buy a building and we're just going to mark the rents down to 50%, whatever the market is. So let's see how that works. So what happens? Well, let's keep everything else the same. So it's no cheaper to buy it, right? Because the landowner doesn't really care that you're going to do something nice for the most part. I mean, there's very rare cases. If it's public land, of course, it helps a lot. But if it's not, then you're still paying a market rate price for that land. But then you take it, is it any cheaper to build it? No, it's no cheaper to build affordable housing than market rate housing. And maybe some high-end condos might be a little bit more expensive to build. But in general, you still need structure. You still need to create nice, safe, attractive, pleasant places for people to live. And that's what HPD does. They make sure that these are very high quality places for people to live. Just because it's affordable housing, it shouldn't look like affordable housing. So they're expensive to build. But then what happens without the financing sources that HPD or other agencies might put together? You just lower your rent. So you've lowered your rent 50%. So now instead of that gross potential income being $600,000, we're down to $300,000. So we still have a 5% vacancy. Our gross effective income is lower. Our expenses haven't really changed. So, you still have to heat the units, pay utilities, take care of it. So it's still it's not really any cheaper to maintain it. And then your net operating income is much lower. So if the rents are cut in half, your NOI decreases by even more. Your NOI is decreasing by, I think it's 71% in this case. So your debt is much, much lower, less than half the size. You only get 1.6 million of debt instead of 5.3 million in the original example. So now instead of 1.3 million of equity, you need $5 million of equity. And now let's see. So return on equity minus 13%. Like, what does that even mean? Well, that means you're not even getting your money out. Okay. That means you have lost kind of a big chunk of the equity that you've put into this. And unless you've got some fairly deep pockets, this might be your last foray into real estate. You're kind of done at this point. So, it becomes really, really difficult. So, a lot of developers or not-for-profit groups that want to do this, they have to find a way to work with the city to get these other incentives that are in very high demand to make it possible to do this. And that's kind of what I've done for the city, and what I'm doing now for a developer is trying to make these things work. But it's not an easy thing to do. So, just saying like, why, people are making too much money and just cut the rents. Well, it's a very kind of complicated series of repercussions that happen when you do that. And the project is not going to be feasible going forward. So, do you want me to recap, or any questions on this one?
Well, I was just sort of going to say, so even if a developer does have the best interest of the community at heart and wants to do something like this, as a non-for-profit, for instance, it's really financially not feasible, and your only options are something like LIHTC or any of the HPD or HDC programs, which are also in high demand, so therefore highly competitive. Is that fair? That's
absolutely fair. New construction more so than some of the preservation programs. So some of the preservation programs, they have programs that can be a little bit quicker, but they don't involve tax credits. And then it's kind of a package of how do we make adjustments to make it work for people that are willing to take a market rate building and sign a regulatory agreement that says we're only going to charge 50% of what we could charge, lower our rents, create true affordable housing. And then how are they still going to stay on their feet, not lose their shirts? So that's the question. And there's a lot of creative, thoughtful, smart people that try to make these things work and develop programs to make it work. But it's a challenge. It's not easy, and this is why. There are a lot of complications, and it becomes a very expensive thing, especially in a place like New York, where real estate is very expensive to buy or to build. So, to sum up. Real estate is expensive and slow to build. Getting ahead of myself there. It involves a lot of participants. There's a lot of players in this to make it work. It's not just that, the community board can say, hey, we want to build affordable housing, let's build affordable housing. Or we want somebody to build a grocery store, let's just build grocery stores. There's a lot of people that have to be involved to make it work because it's expensive. You need financing from a lot of different groups. Everybody has to be satisfied to make it work. So it's a dance. It's a constant negotiation. It's a negotiation in a market that's constantly changing. So that's what makes it really tricky. So when problems arise, who's the first one to feel that? It's the equity investors, the equity owners, the sponsors, the developers, often, that feel that pain the first because they're the most exposed. Debt lenders have some protection. Unless things really go south, then they can get in trouble too. But equity investors feel the first pain and the most pain. So if equity investors take a look at the underwriting and feel like, you know what, I don't feel great about this. I'm not sure if the return that we're projecting is going to compensate us for the risk that is involved in this project, then they're just not going to participate. They'll just pass on it. And without that equity, without those investors, without people that believe in the project, there is no development. Mm-hmm. So, hey, the summary, to sum it all up, finance drives development. So, just a reality of kind of how it works with these things that cost a lot of money and take a lot of involvement, a lot of people to make happen. So, with that, I can throw it up into some questions.
Oh, yes. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. Okay. One thing I want to remind everybody, Leon, you did a great job, and there's a lot of meat in here. There's a lot to go over. I know that some people may want to go back and recheck everything else, digest it a little bit, and come up with other questions. And you can reach out directly to Oldest Story and Neighborhood Association. Victor, I think, put our email in the chat. You may want to do it again. It's info@oana-ny.org, and ask the questions, and we will get back to Leon. And at that point, we can, respond to that question. And also remember, that you can go back to listen to this both on YouTube and on Facebook. I think what I come out of this with, number one, is the fact that I've been dealing with, I've been on the land use committee of the local community board for 21 years, and it's often that I found that the financial side of this has never ever been addressed. It's something that not only is it something that's brought up so that we have some sort of parameters to make a decision. We don't even know the financing side. Developers, nobody tells us. We don't get any kind of an idea of what kind of return on investment is actually happening here. So it's often very difficult for us to make decisions. I think the one thing that could come out of this is I'd love to see at some point, and this is again my pie in the sky stuff, but I would love to see particularly when the ULURP comes through, which is when we get involved, that the financial justification for the increase in zoning and things be given to us in something like a package like Leon just described to us. It would make our decision not only easier, it'd make it much more effective and much more in reality. That's my personal thought. I know that there was you had a slide with some other questions on it too.
Sure.
We put that up. We can maybe buzz through those really quickly.
Sure.
And then I know we have 2 more presenters that we have to get up. What's also interesting is people that are still on the line that have interest about personal finance and mortgages and things like that. We have a great presenter coming up after our next presenter who can answer questions on, what programs are there for the individual landowner or individual house owner so that they can again become owners locally, which is one thing we all want to try and do.
Leon, I did have one question because we kind of touched on it earlier when we discussed it in terms of the timing of real estate development projects and financing and construction loans in the pro forma model. As far as I know, construction loans are interest only, and they're typically between 2 to 3 years or whatever the duration of the construction period would be. What happens when, as does happen in the world, there are delays on a construction project and a developer hasn't met that timeline?
So it's not good. A lot of times, typically in the loan agreements, you have extensions. So extensions usually come at some sort of cost. There's usually a basis point, a couple basis points, half a basis point, some sort of extension fee. And then obviously there's interest paid for a longer period of time that you're never going to get back. That's just kind of hurting the project in the end. So there are usually 1 or 2 extensions that are built into the loans as a general rule, but they often also have sometimes conditions. And if those conditions aren't met, then the lender does not have to extend. So what happens at that point is they become a workout or at least a very heated talk and negotiation. And so it becomes, what do you want to do? The lender has the right at a certain point in time to foreclose on the project. Now, a construction lender does not want to foreclose on a project because what are they foreclosing on? It's a pile of sticks and bricks and stuff. It's not something that has leases already and is something that is marketable. So if they take that and they sell that, it's going to be at a severe discount, and all the equity is likely going to be lost. So during construction loan, they're very difficult. Once you start building, if you ever see a project that stops building kind of halfway through, that's a major work on a major problem for somebody and probably for a bunch of people. So once you start building, you have very little opportunity to change the project, to slow down, to take a left turn or a right turn. Once you start building, you need to finish. And if you don't on time, it becomes very complicated and messy and expensive, and somebody's losing a lot of money. So that's typically what happens. You plan for certain things, but you can't plan for everything.
Thanks.
Okay, as the one layperson up here, okay, I'm gonna buzz through these questions, give you what I think the answers are from listening to your presentation, and you correct me, okay? How is financing affordable housing different from financing typical market rate housing? Well, I think we did touch upon that quite a bit. It's reduced income from rentals, so that reduces the return on investment and the the percentage. And as a matter of fact, the example you showed a 13% loss or a 16% loss compared to when it was not affordable was like a 15 or 16% profit. So it's just that you lower the income, you lower the all the other expenses are basically the same. You lower the income, so it's just natural that you don't have the same return on investment.
And so basically, it just won't happen unless you get those other sources, those tax credits or real estate tax exemptions, or other financing sources, subsidy from the city. And New York City is very atypical. It's one of the only municipalities that it's far and away the biggest municipal housing agency in the country, and its budget is much larger than anybody else's, putting in $1 billion, 1.3 billion a year into just as pure as subsidized below market loans into making these things possible. So New York is a unique beast to do this, but it involves a whole bunch of other kind of creative financing sources. Some projects I've seen projects looked at, reviewed projects with 20 different sources of financing, 20 different sources to make it pencil out and to get to that full capital stack so that you can cover all of your uses. Mm-hmm. So it's complicated.
Okay, biggest challenges in today's market, or I would say the biggest challenge right now is obviously that the rental market has been greatly reduced here because of COVID. Income is reduced. A lot of apartments are not even rented at all. Many people left the city, so that is a challenge. How does a longer approval time affect real estate development? We discussed that. Obviously, the longer you have to carry property and finance it when you're not actually improving it, it makes the whole project less viable, right? Okay.
Absolutely, and when it's affordable housing, if there's a longer approval time, or if things get slowed down or other things happen in the market, it either requires more money to be put in, and those become more expensive units, or you can't build to the same depth of affordability. You can't offer units at the same low rents of 30% of AMI or whatever that HPE a lot of times tries to target. You need a higher mix of higher incomes to kind of cover those delays and costs. So this is the struggle that you go through. Either you need more capital up front, or you need more income generation afterwards to pay it all back.
Okay. Why do banks and appraisers look at current market conditions when it surely will be different in 2 years? Well, you have to have some base, I'm assuming, whenever you make assumptions. And then you can go back a number of years. The longer you go back with a bigger chunk of time, the more viable a number you can come up with to what things will look like in 2 years. I would think.
Right, and nobody wants to take a risk, right? Banks and appraisers aren't in the business of taking a lot of risk and making forecasts. They're going to say, if things are lousy now, I'm going to assume they're going to be lousy tomorrow and the day after and the day after. Developers tend to have a much rosier eye on the future, because they have to believe. They're believing that they're kind of creating something that is going to be good for the community, the community is going to want, that is going to be attractive to people. And banks kind of look at the other way a lot of times, which is, what could go wrong? And understandably, that's what they're trying to protect, is on that downside, extreme downside risk.
And that's why equity financing is also so expensive, because it's not backed by actual concrete assets. It's just it's a bigger risk, so because they have a bigger possibility of loss.
It's the first loss position and the last to be repaid.
And then the sub debt and mezzanine debt and preferred equity. Mezzanine debt was the middle, I remember. Okay, you can explain this one really quickly, and then we can sign off to them. So that was.
Sure. So sub debt is subordinated debt, and mezzanine debt is a form of subordinated debt. So it's usually getting to a higher loan to value than a first lender would otherwise get to. So it's riskier debt because the first mortgage gets paid first, and then the mezzanine would be in second position. It's subordinated. So that's kind of what mezz and sub debt are. Preferred equity is a tranche of equity that gets paid first. So it almost kind of fills in as a equity class that is a bit safer than your typical equity. So mezz debt, sub debt, and preferred equity are things that can be inserted tranches between pure debt and equity. They're things that can kind of fill in the middle, and they're kind of a blended hybrid sort of thing with similar risk profiles, preferred equity and mezz debt and sub debt. So it's kind of another way to fill in a budget, fill in your capital stack.
That equity is coming out of your net operating income, right?
It has to be, yeah, I mean, it has to be serviced. So, and it's much more expensive to service. So yeah, it very much, has to be paid, and it's taking away from what's left over for normal equity. Absolutely.
Okay, Leon, thank you so much. Stacy, thank you so much. We know we actually ran over time, but this is so fascinating. I just hope that everybody enjoyed it. And again, if go back, listen again. If you have questions, please email us and we will get you answers. Leon, Stacy, thank you so much. I hope you stick around and enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you, Richard.
Good night. Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, I'd like to bring up now, as you know, we've been having somebody from the performing arts appear every month, the last 4 or 5 months. I actually came from the performing arts also, so I just think it's important that we give an avenue for the performing artists to perform. I mean, we're not able to play much anymore. We're not able to do much. So I've known Anthoula, Katsimatides for a long time. We've worked together on occasion over the last number of years. And Anthoula is an actor, writer, producer, voiceover artist. She's a member of SAG-AFTRA and AEA. Anthoula has been featured in several films and TV shows and has performed her solo show off-Broadway, which I saw and it was great. Currently, she's an executive producer of Olympia, a documentary about Olympia Dukakis. So, Anthoula, please come up. Hi. Oh, I think you're muted.
I was muted. Hi, Richard.
Good to see you again. And now you're seeing me without a drum in my hand.
I know, it's kind of odd, actually. Yes, Richard and I used to perform together. I was a Greek folk dancer, and we would perform several places where Richard would play his drum for us. And that was always I think I've known you for over, it's a long time.
Well, I didn't want to say the number.
It's a long time. And this is wonderful, Richard. I think that what you do here for this organization and what the association does for Astoria and its residents is really quite fascinating. I absolutely took in Leon's presentation because it was really interesting. I mean, a lot of it for someone who isn't so nuanced is, especially for an artist, it's really hard to understand. But as I was listening, I thought, oh my God, being a developer is just like being a producer. I kind of, and I'll talk a little bit about myself, but as a producer, I saw so many similarities between being a producer and a developer, and I'd love to chat about that. But, I just wanted to quickly tell everybody hi, and I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during this crazy time. I am an actor. I am a writer and a producer and a voiceover artist. And, I know that this is, we're supposed to be talking about acting in the pandemic, but I think it's going to turn into something else because unfortunately during the pandemic, during the last year, productions had ceased. And so there really wasn't much acting going on. Unless you're, yeah, go ahead.
I said, or music.
Or music, right? Or any kind of the arts. Unfortunately, our theaters are closed, but they're I think actually I think our theaters have just opened, right? Well, our movie theaters, but our play theaters or theaters are I think right behind. Very optimistic about that. So I am also born and raised in Astoria. I was born at Astoria General Hospital, which is now Mount Sinai. And I, absolutely love love my neighborhood, and wouldn't change Astoria for the world. It's been through so many changes, and I think the developers have done somewhat of a good job. I love that there are organizations and there are activists and our councilmen and women, defending Astoria and watching out for what it is that Astoria really needs and the residents really need. I think we really need a performing arts center. I mean, I know we have APAC, which is fantastic. I don't know where their home is now these days.
Actually moved to Long Island City.
Oh, they did. Did they take the Secret Theater's location?
Yes.
Can you tell me that? Yeah, which is nice. But it'd be nice. And of course, we have the little cultural center. The Greeks have that little cultural center, the Astoria, the KEP, Greek Cultural Center, which is nice to have. But so I was born and raised in Astoria, and really quick. I grew up in Astoria in a very sheltered family and of Greeks, I'm Greek, and in a community where everybody knew your name. And as I got older and as I became an actor, I decided to write a solo show called What Will People Think? Because growing up in Astoria, Richard, I'm sure you know this, right? There was always this, really loving kind of community of people, but everyone did know what your name, and sort of, back in the day, you would walk down the streets and see people you knew, which was a wonderful thing, because I feel like even today, Astoria still maintains that sense of neighborhood and community, which is why I would never change it. But, growing up Greek in Astoria, was really, really hard. And so I did write a solo show, which I wanted to share with you tonight. But in the interest of time, because I'm not performing it anywhere and because of COVID, it's called What Will People Think? And, I'm sure in the near future, I will be performing it again. You can find all my details on Anthoula.com for more information about me and my career. But currently, what took up all of my time during COVID was Olympia Dukakis, the actress, about 10 years ago. And this is why it's interesting what Leon was saying. I was taking notes because he talked about mission-based projects, right? Well, in our industry, they're called passion-based projects. They're called passion projects. And Harry Mavromichalis, who is this incredible filmmaker, decided that his passion project was going to be a documentary on the life and times of Olympia Dukakis, who many people know her as the outspoken, mother in Cher's mother in Moonstruck. That's how she won her Oscar award. She was also obviously in Steel Magnolias, very memorable role, and many other films. She was primarily a theater actress, which is why when I went to the craft, I sought her out, and she became my mentor. And I've known her for 10 years. And while I was studying under her and taking a workshop, I met Harry, who took the time, 3 years of his life, to actually follow Olympia around between the ages of 80 and 83 and record her. So he recorded hours and hours, hundreds of hours of footage. And what we had to do as filmmakers, as a producer, as editors, was to narrow it down to 90 minutes. So before I continue talking about Olympia, we have a trailer of the film that I'd love to show everyone. It is now available on demand for the whole world to see. You could see it on iTunes, Apple TV, Google Play, Vimeo on demand, also available on demand. But take a look at Olympia, and I'm just, spoiler alert, there might be curses in this. So if you have kids watching, just be aware, okay? She's an outspoken woman.
We feel in the theater because someplace we know all of this that's inside of us, we will have a chance to access it and liberate it. To the green room.
She has a life force, like one of those spaceships that has this battery that takes you out to the stars. You can see it when you're in the room with her. You can see it in her work.
Fuck you! You got a love bite on your neck. He's coming back this morning. What's the matter with you? Your life's going down the toilet.
Olympia Dukakis and Moonstruck. Everybody was thrilled that a great actress who had dedicated her life to the arts was finally getting the recognition that she deserved.
Olympia the actress is superb. Her range is frightening and wonderful to watch. It's what every actor wants. I want it.
Hit this! Go ahead, Malin! Slapper!
One of the things that makes me happy and alive is work.
What are you afraid of doing? Something wrong? You're in the basement on Clinton Street.
She believes in justice. Justice for people who are downtrodden, justice for people who've been manipulated or lied to.
I'm so proud of my preoperative transsexual lesbian son.
I remember her eyes. They were very sexy. And I says, oh my God, this woman. And then she wasn't a shrinking violet. She never was.
You dance with somebody, bang, that prick is hard, you know? You rub against somebody, you walk into the prick is hard. I said, but then the day comes that you can't take for granted a hard prick. I'll walk down the street and there'll be a wonderful wind. I love wind. In that I think about not having this anymore, not having that wind. And I have this flash of fear. You know what, Rosemary? I'm an octogenarian today.
Is that toilet paper? No,
Oh my God. I'm 80 years old. I find that unforgivable. There's only one way to know. I have to go out and find out. Is it time to stop?
Thank you, Richard, for playing that.
Well, thank you. It's a great job. I love that.
Thank you. You know, even the trailer was, you know, something that we had to put together delicately. And I apologize if anyone was offended by the curse words, but you know, that's who Olympia is. She is not just an actress. You know, she is this life force that exudes hope and vitality and strength. And I think what people, historians, can identify with, since we are sort of the hub of diversity, is that Olympia, because of her name, never felt like she belonged. You know, she always felt like she was an outsider her entire life, which is why she created her own work, which is why she was always, you know, a proponent and an advocate of those who were undermined, you know. And so this is a film that encourages people of all ages and genders and all walks of life to just embrace themselves and others, and it enables them to experience their transcendence in such a profound way. I mean, and she is a life force, you know. She is someone who has forged her own path. It's an inspirational film, and I really want to encourage everybody to watch it, download it. You know, you can go to olympiathefilm.com for more information on it, and see where you can see it on your TV. And, you know, as a producer, I have to tell you, I was listening to Leon and I couldn't believe it, you know, the complications and that a project has and, you know, the uncertainty of a market. You know, COVID really became this uncertain market for us. We didn't have movie theaters to play the film, and so we had to look for new and creative ways of generating income. And yes, we have investors and we have donors, you know, and the difference of the financing that comes with that, and capital up front, while looking for income generators down the line to get that money back and to give it back. You know, people taking risks. It's really hard to ask people. It is incredible how similar it is. You know, making a movie is the same thing as, you know, building a project. You know, they're expensive and slow to build, I think is what Leon said. And, you know, that's why we need people who believe in the project. And other than money, we also want, you know, people to believe in Olympia and believe in the film, see the film. That is the most incredible way that people could help us as artists, you know, get her message out to the world by simply, you know, downloading it, you know, when they're home, sharing it.
You know, you were indeed lucky to have this kind of passion, and you also had the time because of the pandemic actually to focus that passion into creating something. You know, yes. For myself, I put my passion into this association. You have something you're putting into, so we are able to focus in different directions. One thing I also want to mention to the audience watching, that Anthoula was very involved in the development down in lower Manhattan after 9/11. She was on the board of directors of the, you have to remind me the name of the.
I'm currently still on the board. It's the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. It's the official site downtown at the World Trade Center, where we built this memorial museum to all those beautiful lives lost, including the lives lost in the aftermath of 9/11 due to toxins in the air.
Your passion on that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been involved for 20 years in memory of my brother John, Katsimatides, who died that day, and it is, you know, something that I really encourage people. It's been really hard for New Yorkers to actually visit that site, Richard, and I understand it. And that too is an area that had to close because of the pandemic, and it has been reopened. And so I encourage New Yorkers to get down there and pay their respects. I guarantee you will be filled with hope. And you can channel your pain, you know, through the hope that we try to provide down at that site. Thank you for mentioning that, Richard. But in the meantime, I want everybody to see Olympia the Film. If you go to olympiathefilm.com, that would be really, really helpful for us and for Olympia to share her story with everyone. It's available now on demand. I won't take up any more of your time. I don't know if anybody has questions.
One thing I want to mention, Tony Foy, who's with LaGuardia Performing Arts Center, LPAC, I guess. She just said on the message when we were discussing different local performing artist centers and stuff.
Oh my gosh. Of course, Tony. How could I forget that? I love that stage. I've seen several performances there actually, and I hope to perform there one day. Thank you so much, the LaGuardia Performing Arts Center. Thank you for bringing that up, Tony. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good. Okay. Well, I know we've been running a little over time, but I know you got the message out, and I know that people will listen. If anybody has questions again, you can email us email us at the email that's inside the chat. And, you know, if you want, you can share this with friends of yours. We will be putting out a lot of this recordings, and we divide it up into different sections so that if you want to forward this information in the audience to other people, please do so. And Anthoula, great to see you again.
Thank you, Richard. Pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Back on stage together.
Yes, looking forward to it. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good. And last, we have, for those of you who, we're going to talk about a project indirectly that's been an amazing construction project, and that's LaGuardia Airport. I just think that the job that's been done there over the years while running an operating airport and actually doing construction is really phenomenal. We've been a big supporter of that here at OANA. And they also, when they open, are going to have a lot of jobs opening up for our people, good jobs, good paying jobs. So I'd like to bring in David Burgoa, okay, from Neighborhood Housing. They're involved in personal financing for housing. They also are tasked with promoting and letting people know about different jobs that are happening at the new LaGuardia Airport. So David, sorry it's been a little late, but please join us.
No, hello everybody. Hi Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Perfect. Let me see. I'm trying.
I know you don't have a picture, correct?
No, not today. Unfortunately. But hopefully I'll get to see you and everybody soon. Now that we start getting into hopefully the end of this craziness, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So let me see.
So you want to talk about both the LaGuardia? You want to start with LaGuardia jobs and how people find out what's available and what your organization is doing with the LaGuardia partners?
Let me see. I did prepare a little presentation. Can everybody see it?
No, I don't see it at this point. Victor, can you put it up? Oh, there it is. Okay.
Nope, perfect. All right. So, well, thank you, everybody. My name is David Burgoa. I'll do my best to keep it short and tight. We are Neighborhood Housing Services of Queens. A little bit about us. We're a HUD certified non-for-profit organization. We're a housing counseling agency We were established in 1994. We have 25 years of experience in homeownership services and counseling here in the Queens community. We try to revitalize and preserve underserved Queens neighborhoods by providing opportunities for homeownership, education, affordable housing, financial assistance, and empowerment, homeowner services, and now workforce development, aside from the community leadership. We don't want to, we don't want to feed you one day. We want to teach you so you know how to feed yourself for the rest of your life. Our vision. Neighborhood Housing Services envisions a borough of healthy, sustainable, and affordable communities. We want to make sure that the people that live in the community that make up these wonderful communities around Queens, they stay in those communities, whether it is through homeownership or whether it is through affordable rent, through affordable housing, right? Our mission, again, revitalize underserved neighborhoods by creating and preserving affordable housing opportunities and providing opportunities for homeownership, education, financial assistance, and community leadership. And we work in partnership with government and businesses. We are led by local residents and guided by local needs. Our board is a combination of neighbors and also private entities. Also, we have a little bit of everything. These are our services and programs. We do rental counseling, which is pretty much affordable housing, landlord and tenants' rights. If you're a tenant and you have questions, we help you answer those questions in terms of your rights. Landlord, same thing. Affordable housing, we do help people apply for affordable housing. Financial capability, we help you with your finances, find ways in which you can save money, find ways in which you can manage your budget a little better. And again, I'll mention why in a few minutes. It's not only to save, but it is to invest. We do first-time home buying, and that's where that portion comes in. We want you to save so that you can purchase your first home. We want to have you ready to purchase your first house because, again, that is part of you staying in this community and living in the community that you're building around yourself. After you purchase your house, we do have homeowner services because we want you to keep that house. We don't want you to buy today and sell tomorrow, or buy today and sell it in a year, 2, 3. No, we want you to keep that house because, again, a house is an important piece of the owning of a house is an important piece of preserving our communities sustainable. And then workforce development, which in a way ties into it, because again, we all need money to purchase a house. We do give you options on ways you can save, but we also give you workforce development opportunities where you can apply for maybe a part-time job additionally to what you have, maybe a switching career, and different options. Lastly, Adopt a Family, which is the program I'm just gonna say out loud now, because it is something that just was created during the pandemic. It is a program that was funded by local residents. Local residents provided donations to Adopt a Family's weekly groceries expenses. Let me put it that way. We kind of calculated how much money it would take to feed a family for a week, a family of 4, and we had amazing donations so that we can help feed those families that were in need. We then identified some families that were in desperate need of groceries and food and services, and then they are part of our program. Right now, our program is fully capped, as you can imagine. We do have a lot of people to serve. Again, we are open to donations. That way we can keep opening the program. But if you have a family that may be in need, that it's a dire situation, please let us know. We may not always have everything, but we do our best to assist in whatever way we can.
How do you, can I interrupt? How do you solicit funds for this? Do you do like a GoFundMe page, or do you events?
Yeah. For the Adopt a Family, we have set up in our website a section where you can donate, and you can see some of the impact that we've had on a lot of these families. Our website is www.nhsofqueens.org. I think it should be, it's at the bottom of your screen.
Put that in chat, Victor. That would be great, so people have a record of it.
Thank you, Victor. So yeah, that is a way in which people can donate, and you don't have to donate, for a full week of groceries. You can donate as much as you can, and then we'll do our best to manage our funds and resources and help as many people as we can. And that is the Adopt a Family program. Let me jump into the rental counseling. For affordable housing, we do provide one-on-one assistance filling out applications for affordable housing. For example, Section 8, NYCHA, and Housing Connect 2.0. Now, as many people know, Section 8 and NYCHA are waitlist-based programs, which means it's first come, first serve. So right now, you can imagine how long their waiting lists are. So if you've already filed and you're on the wait list, we do help you renewing that application. I believe it's every year or every 2 years. But if, let's say, you are a new applicant, we do help you fill out those initial applications, but we would recommend that you do Housing Connect 2.0, which is the affordable housing lotteries that the city has put out, based on the new developments that are populating our neighborhoods. That is one. Then we also assist with landlord and tenants' rights. If, let's say, you are facing evictions and your landlord locks you out, we do our best to guide you through the legal process of the right way of evict someone. You cannot just lock up the room and say you gotta get out. No, there is a process. So we try to educate tenants as well as landlords, because as many people know, there is not only bad landlords, there are also some bad tenants. So we do our best to work with both landlords and tenants so that we can help them navigate the legal process of whatever it is they're trying to achieve. I used eviction as an example, but there are other processes like repairs, withholding rent, and what circumstances, etc. So that is in terms of what we do for rental counseling. You sit with our counselor, and based on your needs, he's going to discuss with you your options. Now, for financial capability, we have also a counselor who is going to help you improve your credit, create a budget, and diversify your income streams. I know we've all been hit hard by the pandemic. Our incomes have suffered. So he'll sit down with you and find ways in which you can save money, whether it is through, tying things up through a budget, diversifying your income stream through different employment opportunities, not necessarily only in the airport, but our counselors handle different opportunities. Like, something that our counselor himself does is he hosts dogs. He dog sits, I think that's the word. He dog sits for a while a person is traveling, and that is extra income that he's making. And he loves dogs, so to him it's amazing. So we do look into that if that's something you're looking into. Uber Eats is another option. Amazon now offers different opportunities for reading and recording people reading books for kids, for adults, young adults. So we do work with those as well. Mm-hmm. Unemployment benefits assistance. If you are trying to apply for unemployment, we will help you fill out the application and follow up with appropriate agency. That is for financial capability. Again, and the goal is for the last two programs, affordable housing and for financial capability, to get you ready so you can start in our first time home buying program. The idea, again, we want to keep you in the neighborhood. We want you to buy a house, to own a house, and to stay here and keep our communities beautiful. And it is a lot of moving pieces. We don't necessarily force you to do financial capability, affordable housing, and then come into a program. No, it is your choice. Each program works independently. But again, if this is out there, I say why not? We do.
I'd say one thing too, as far as first-time home buying. From living in this neighborhood for so many years, one of the best things that can happen to a neighborhood is when you have owners owning the properties on the street. As soon as you have absentee landlords, that's when the quality of life conditions all through the street starts to go down. So we're greatly in favor of people owning their own homes and being a strong part of the neighborhood. So,
no, absolutely, and again, it just strengthens the neighborhood. Something that was mentioned earlier is the fact that you used to walk down the streets and know everybody, or everybody would know you. We want that feeling, you know. We want everybody to know each other, to work collaboratively, especially now. Something, you know, that aroused during the pandemic is that sense of trying to help each other, checking on your neighbors, make sure that they're fine, that they have everything they need, especially during lockdown these past few months. That has been an important piece on what we've been trying to communicate to people, you know. Just make sure that your neighbors are okay, that they have water, that they have paper. Toilet paper was a big one. So, you know, ideally we want to counsel you one-on-one so that you can purchase your first house. We do home buyer education courses where we tell you the process. Anybody that tells you just give me $10,000 and I'll get you a mortgage, they're not telling the truth. There is a big process that is involved, and we try to tell you specifically what you need to do to navigate that process, and we'll walk that process with you and with the different partners that we work with. We will help you with your down payment and closing costs through our grants and the loans that we have. Now, many people ask me, what is a grant? It's basically a loan, but it is a forgivable loan. As long as you fulfill certain requirements that the grant requires, it is forgivable. For example, one of the grants that we work with requires you to live on the property for at least 10 years. Again, that ties in with our mission that we want you to stay in the community. And at the same time, they're giving you money so that you can stay in the community, but you got to stay for at least 10 years. If, let's say, by any chance you have to move when it's 5, we can work it out with the lenders. You may have to return some of the money that was borrowed, but again, we'll work with you on a one-on-one case. And again, this is free money. They're giving you money so you can purchase your house. I always say, why not? It's free money. And if you're planning to buy a house, ideally you are thinking about staying on that community for the long term. This is not encouraging people to purchase a house, to rent it, and move to Florida. We want people that, you know, want to stay in the neighborhood. And then lastly, we'll help you with the pre-qualification and pre-approval. We work with all banks across the board. We'll direct you into which ones have the better options based on our one-on-one meeting with you. We'll look at everything that you have to show us, and then we'll tell you, well, this bank has this program, but this one has this program. You know, you may like TD Bank, but if Chase is offering you something a little more juicy, why not give them a shot, right? We'll work with every bank across the board. Now, you are a homeowner. Congratulations, you purchased your house. We want you to keep it. We will counsel you on mortgages and property taxes. Not only do you get the grants for when you're purchasing your house, but there are also government programs that will help with the property taxes. And again, since we have that communication with the banks, we can work out deals in case, you know, there are some issues with your mortgage. Things happen, we understand. Last year, everybody got hit really hard with the pandemic. The banks had to step up and say, listen, you know, we cannot force people to pay money when they're not working anymore. So they started programs to defer payments, to, you know, I don't want to say forgive, because they're not forgiving the mortgages, but they're giving you options to pay that money or refinance. So again, you have us to work with the banks on your behalf. We'll work with you as well, and we'll do our best to address whatever needs you're facing. We want you to stay in your home. And the second portion to that is home repairs. We work with grants for emergency repairs to homeowners who cannot afford them. Luckily, we're getting into spring, but last year, before we entered the winter, we had people who needed repairs on their roof. Winter was coming, the roof had some cracks. You know, these people didn't know what to do. The repairs were super expensive. We offered our assistance. We were able to find some money to help them make those repairs. As you can see, some of the programs that we work with are Restore, which is up to $10,000, Project Help up to $20,000, and the Adequate and Sustainable Home Repair Program. AHC up to 40,000. Again, if you're a homeowner and you're watching this and you have some emergency repairs that need to be made, please reach out to us. They're very specific on what an emergency repair is, so I cannot promise that we can get you an emergency repair grant, but we will certainly do our best, especially if you fulfill the requirements. It's almost guaranteed, you know.
Are there programs for seniors? Senior-specific programs? Often, seniors are on fixed incomes, and when it's difficult for them when these kinds of repairs come up.
Yes, and that is, thank you for mentioning that, Richard. That is one thing that these, when you submit, we help you submit your application. That is one thing that these grants look at. They look at how much of an emergency the repair is, and they also look at whether the person is a senior or not. So if you are a senior, you really have high chances of getting these grants. Not to discourage anyone that is not a senior, but again, because these are emergency repairs, there are categories, and there is a certain preference to the people. I think it's on a need base. I think that's the right word. So yeah, we do. And again, if let's say we cannot get you restored, we'll try our best to get you project help, and we try to manage everything as best as we can. So please, if you have any issues with your property, you need emergency repairs, reach out to us. Now, this is my program, Workforce Development. As Richard mentioned, we are working with the Port Authority, the Council for Airport Opportunities, and ELMCOR, and we started a local hiring program for community boards 1 through 4. As you know, and Richard mentioned, the airport is being redeveloped. They're expanding. And with that, these agencies like ours advocated so that, they're building in our backyard. Why not, give us something to work with? If they're expanding, why not give us a chance or give our neighbors a chance to apply to those jobs that are opening? The redevelopment is still in progress, but that doesn't mean the jobs are not available. We are already partnering with a lot of the businesses in the airport, and every time they have a need for workers, they reach out to us, to the partnership, and we do our best to send people to fulfill that need. For example, usually we get calls that they want to interview 20 people for security guards. Okay, we go to our database, we look at people who are interested in applying to be a security guard, and then we tell them, tomorrow there's an interview, would you be able to make it? And, we proceed with that referral in hopes that you get hired. We do our best to prepare you the best we can so that you get the job. Ultimately, the decision is not yours, but we'll work with you. If, let's say, you couldn't get the job tomorrow, next week it may open up again, because guess what? People didn't show up. Didn't show up to work. They passed the interview. The week after, they didn't show up to work. Well, now they need another 10 people to make sure they cover those 20 positions. That is just one example for security guards. But for the positions that are available, there's not only security guards. We have everything that you can think of inside the airport. Maintenance, customer service, food service, food packing, cargo, driving, working with the airlines. Anything that you can think of in the airport, we refer people to those positions. So if let's say you have a background in food service, we have jobs available for food service in the airport. If you're trying to switch careers, we'll give you the options. Every week, these job orders are different because, again, the businesses are trying to fulfill whatever need they have that week, and we try to send the best people we know to apply for these positions. So
one thing I'd like to say to everyone too is that the airports themselves are the largest employers in Queens and have been for many, many years. And as a matter of fact, I used to work in cargo side of the business out of JFK for 25 years, and it's very steady, very good employment, and it's a great opportunity for people. So I hope that they can take advantage of it.
No, absolutely. They have great opportunities. Again, the airports where, not a lot of flights were open, but not a lot of people were let go. People kept working at the airport. In fact, they kept hiring people for maintenance, because a way to win people's trust so that they can continue traveling, with the limited traveling that we had. To gain people's trust, they needed to make sure everything was squeaky clean. So a lot of maintenance positions opened up when you may think, oh, they're not going to open up new jobs. Quite the opposite. They open up specific jobs, but that was an opportunity for people. And again, if you live in community boards 1 through 4, you understand the parking issue. We want to make sure that people that live in the neighborhood work in the airport that's in the neighborhood, because guess what? You can bike to work, you can walk to work. That's going to reduce the impact of all these cars driving from the other boroughs for for people that work in the airport. So it is a win-win for everybody. We are very happy to partner up with the Port Authority and these wonderful nonprofit organizations, the Council for Airport Opportunities and UMCOR, to bring these opportunities to Queens residents. If you are not in Queens, don't be discouraged. We can still do a referral. But again, as I've explained to you, the goal is having people from the community take first dibs at these jobs. But, if you are looking for a job, reach out, apply. It may not be LaGuardia. We also do referrals to JFK, and we also do referrals to Newark. So please let us know. Lastly, we do workshops on resume assistance, interviewing skills, cover letters. We'll do our best to prepare you so that you are successful when we are sending you to apply for these jobs. Not to say that, one example, someone comes with a beautiful resume, but given our experience, there are tips and tricks that can make your resume stand out with the companies in the airport. So we'll work with you. We have a counselor specifically for resume assistance, and she'll I was gonna say she'll sit down with you, but right now everything's virtual. She'll communicate with you, and via phone, now we have all these wonderful applications, Zoom, WebEx, whatever works for you. She'll work with you so that we can get your resume, your cover letter in the best shape that we can.
Okay.
And this is how you make your appointment. If for any of the services that I've mentioned, you can call us at 718-457-1017. You can also book your appointments in our website, www.nhsofqueens.org. If you are trying to book an appointment with our counselors, that is the way. Now, for the employment opportunities, what we need you to do is to email your resume at dburgoa, that is me, David Burgoa, at nhsofqueens.org. Once you email me your resume, I will share it with our account managers, who will contact you between 3 to 5 business days to discuss what opportunities we have available at the airport on that specific moment. And it's much easier, trust me, when we have your resume at hand, because we can already match you and we can already go to the point. But again, it is a
email address in the chat. I appreciate it, so people can keep a record of it.
Perfect. Thank you. And that is pretty much it. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. I'm more than happy to work with anyone that needs any of these services and get you the best assistance that we possibly can.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you so much.
I have a question, Richard.
Yes.
David, as someone who's trying to buy his first home, I also am an entrepreneur, and I know a lot of the home buying process depends a lot on like a W-2 history and things like that. Although I've worked many years, in a standard W-2 workforce, but the last year I've been running my own business.
Okay.
So my questions are: does your program, which I'm interested in participating, does it offer assistance for people like me?
Yes, absolutely. For a mortgage, they would require a different set of documents if, let's say, you're running your own company. I don't know those from the top of my head, but you are super lucky because tomorrow we have a home buying orientation.
Oh.
So I would encourage you to register for it. Let me see. I'm gonna try to pull it up. It is in our website.
I'm on the website now.
Oh, perfect. Let me see. So if you go to upcoming events, I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes, right here. It's on free upcoming webinars and upcoming webinars. Home buying orientation tomorrow from 6 to 8. We are going to have an interpretation for English. The webinar itself is going to be in Spanish, but we're going to have interpretation.
Okay, so it's the first event, affordable housing, or which one is?
No, if you scroll down a little bit, it's a home buying orientation.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, we did have affordable housing webinars Monday, yesterday, and today. We are having the home buying orientation tomorrow. And also, if you're a homeowner, we do have a resource fair in April 20th. So again, everything is on our website. I would say that is your best resource, not only for what's upcoming, but let's say by any chance, Victor, you missed the home buying orientation tomorrow. We're gonna have it available on demand. If you go to our virtual webinars, past webinars, we put those here. So if anyone needs to visit one of our previous webinars, we have them here. Like we had a estate planning series. That was an interesting topic. We did 4 nights of estate planning, how to draft a will, how to make sure that it's in the system. It's not only writing it on a piece of paper. You need a lawyer to help you, submit it to the courts. Everything is here on our website.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, appreciate it.
Oh, not a problem.
David, you guys really take on a lot of great subjects, and you've been a great asset for the community. We appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, David. If anybody has any questions, they have the contacts in the chat for David and for the Neighborhood Housing Services. So if for any other reason you have any other questions or for whatever you can't reach them, you can call us and we will put you in contact or email us. So, David, thank you so much. It's been a long night, but I like the fact that we started with how do you finance development and we ended up with how do you finance the home. We sort of covered the whole gamut of what can happen. So I appreciate your input on this. And also, like I said, the airports themselves are great, steady employers for the community in Queens, and what you're doing with them to try and get these jobs out to the people in the communities. The communities that actually are negatively affected, in fact, by the airports at certain times because of traffic and airplane noise and all the construction that's going on. It's also important that not only do we deal with the negative, we also get the positives out of it. So we appreciate what you're doing.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Again, I'm always available if anybody has any questions. You have my contact information. If you can't get to me, you get to Richard. Richard will get to me. He knows how.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Well, this brings us to the end of it was a slightly longer meeting than we expected, but I hope it was very informative. It was interesting. I'd like to thank Leon Hovsepian and Stacy Andriadakis for their presentation on real estate finance, Anthoula Katsimatides for discussions on acting and what she was doing in the pandemic and her wonderful performance, David Burgoa again from the from the Neighborhood Housing Services of Queens. And then also I want to give a great shout out to Victor Prado. Victor, who is our genius on the setting up all the the platforms here on the internet, and he also does the graphics on our flyers and then our linked NYC. As a matter of fact, Victor, if you want to take a second here and explain what you do, we'd love to have you do that.
Sure. So I provide a media company. It's called Ninja Man Media, a little throwback to the 90s TV shows I grew up with. But essentially what I do is provide graphics and social media marketing specifically for small businesses. And I generate value to businesses in that regards as well. But I also, as a media company, produce streaming events like this, as well as provide this graphic artwork and anything media related, I essentially handle.
Good. And then if you want to put your information in the chat, if anybody wants to reach out, that would be great. I also want to thank Malika Schmidt. I don't know if she's on right now, but she's our webmaster and has been since the beginning. As a matter of fact, I've been working with her for 20 years. She also works within social media and handles our website, and she's doing a great job on that. And we have a new employee who's just started. She's a recent graduate of Hunter and the political science degree at Hunter College. Her name is Jessica Tercios, and you'll see more and more and more of her as we go along. And I also want to thank an intern from LaGuardia who's been helping us, Nathaniel Velasquez, okay, and he's been also working with us. And lastly, this is very important. I want to just go back to the beginning. Again, we are on that community advisory board for the 21st Street renovations when they want to put the bus lane in, okay? So please look in the chat. If you go to our website, you'll see the link there, but if you go to our website, you'll see the post anyways. It has the link in it for the presentation from DOT, and we have our email address, feedback@oana-ny.org. We really want your feedback because when we go to these meetings, we are representing the community. We're not just representing ourselves. We need your input to give to DOT. And then lastly, the program conversations that I discussed at the beginning. We want to start bringing out different ideas, sort of a blog type of thing on what can be done, whether it's a big thing or a small thing for the community. We started off with a discussion on Spring and Astoria, what we can do to have safer roads and business districts, particularly when the weather warms up and the streets get busier. We hope everybody can read it and again give us feedback at the same address, feedback@oana-ny.org. You find that again on our website. You would go to the news tab, and then underneath that you'll see press releases, and underneath that you'll see Spring in Astoria. And there is also in the chat the direct link to that. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in a month, and we hope to have another interesting presentation. We are trying to put together now presentations, forums for the candidates for our two council districts, both the seat of Costa Constantinides and also the seat of Jimmy Van Brainer. And we will see if we get that all arranged. We're trying to do that now. You will, in fact, get notification of that. And lastly, I do want to say a thank you to Councilman Costa Constantinides, who just resigned from his seat. He had a lot of health issues and family issues, but he's still continuing to give back to the community. He's now the CEO of Variety Boys and Girls Club, which is going through a major expansion and improvements. So he's still part of our community. We'll still be working with him. We appreciate everything he's done, and we look forward to a great future together. Okay, thank you, everyone, and see you in a month. Bye-bye.